The coronation on Sky News. Follow the King's procession and the service on TV in ultra-high definition and be part of the day with coverage on the Sky News app and YouTube channel. Also on TV and online, My King, My Country, our documentary on what the future could hold for King Charles III. Follow the coronation all weekend on Sky News.
It was very exciting. All the bands that went down before the coach, and then this beautiful gold coach coming down with the Queen in it. Wonderful. Really good day.
She was accompanied by Prince Philip and was cheered to the echo by her subjects.
The most magnificent thing were Indian cavalrymen who had a giant headgear which they'd woven over their heads, and the rain had splashed down. The poor devils were on rows and rows of horses.
The cathedral was crowded with royalty and representatives from nations from all over the world for the solemn ceremony that transformed a shy young girl into a queen.
We saw Winston Churchill as the top of a sort of Scotch egg, just a little bit inside the carriage.
Prime Minister Churchill saw another page of British history written in the enthronement of Elizabeth II.
Brian Kesteven and Julie Windsor have many memories of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation back in 1953 because they were both there. Julie was 12 at the time. Her parents didn't have a TV, so being able to witness such an event in person was a big deal for her. For Brian, it was quite the adventure for his 18-year-old art student self. We're going to hear plenty more about their stories on this podcast because not many people still alive can say they'll have witnessed the coronations of two British monarchs, one post-war, the other post-pandemic. But King Charles' big day will be very different to that of his late mother because Britain is a completely different place now. We'll explore more on all of that on this Sky News Daily with me, Sally Lockwood.
This is really as a wedding between the monarch and the nation in some respects, and the monarch and the church. And I think what's key here, beyond all the sort of flummery and the soap opera, is that our standing as a nation on the international stage has changed hugely. And so too has our relationship with the established church, the Church of England.
Historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop joins me a little later as we compare these two royal occasions. But before we get there, let's take a look at Queen Elizabeth's coronation through the eyes of a 12-year-old, Julie, who won a school competition to go along.
We had to write our names on a piece of paper and it was put into a top hat, and the teacher pulled out two names to go up to the coronation with the school. My name came out first, actually, and it was so exciting. I'd never won anything. That was a big, big, big day for me. And I was behind some other children, but I could see it well enough to take quite a few photographs. My mother had got me a camera, so I could take photographs.
What photos do you have from that day that mean most to you?
I've got the coach, some of the army and all the regalia that was going on at that time. I've got some pictures of that as well.
Suddenly, this young woman who was only 25 years old was going to be queen. What do you remember of feeling as a young girl seeing that happen?
Feeling sad for her and that she was young and had to take on that big responsibility, really.
World War II hadn't ended by that many years, and the country entered this period of austerity and economic restraint. What do you remember about that? Did you feel that as a child?
At that time, things were getting easier, I must say. As a child, we didn't have anything. We didn't have a phone. I don't think then we actually had a television. I think we went round to neighbours to watch big things that were going on at the time. We had rationing. I can remember my mum, she used to cut a coupon out of the ration book, and it was very tiny little coupon, and you used to go down to the sweet shop and get a quarter of sweets. Things like cheese and bacon you didn't get very often.
Julie also recalled having an outside loo growing up and memories of playing with friends in the street, something she feels kids don't really do these days because of things like safety, more cars and technology, with screen time indoors more the norm.
I had a friend and we decided we go on a tandem. But I soon realised I wasn't going to cycle on a tandem with him because he cycled under a tree and I was stupid enough not to duck.
Essentially, Brian and his friend, also called Brian, had originally set off from Bath on a tandem bike. He was on the back seat and, well, ended up getting smacked in the face by a tree branch when his mate ducked and, well, he didn't. The pair ended up going back to Bath. They got separate bikes and then pedalled 100 miles or so through the night to London.
Suddenly we found we're on a piece of land and people were beginning to gather there. But we were one of the first people. It was probably somewhere near St James's Park. This is where we were going to stay. And the rain decided it was going to stay. So there were two sailors in sailor uniforms, and they decided some member of the crowd around was a pickpocket. So they did a sort of naval arrest on him and took him away. There we were, left waiting for the programmes to go ahead.
Brian, why was it so important to you to see the coronation and have a front row seat that you cycled all the way from Bath to central London?
Because I was young and just thought, I'm not going to be stuck here in Bath. And people were going home to watch it on television. And I thought, wouldn't it be better to get on a bike and go to London and watch it from London? But it was memorable, very memorable thing to do.
Brian was old enough to remember the end of World War II just 8 years earlier.
As a boy, I was near Bury Head, which was near Torquay, and a man came out from the Coast Guard station, and it was the end of the war with Japan. And he said, we've just had the message. It's arrived at our station. We've not passed it on yet. You're the first person we've seen. So that was an epic situation to be there and to have the end of the war reported personally before Winston Churchill knew.
Wow, so you believe you knew the war had ended before Winston Churchill did? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I was told that I was the first boy to know of the end of the war because they had intercepted the message at Bury Head.
Wow.
Whether that was true or not, I believed it.
Brian's childhood was tough. He was sent to boarding school just a few weeks after losing his father in World War II. Now, at 87, with white hair and wearing a smart red-checked shirt, he spoke to me from his care home in York, where he now lives, and he's grateful for the options he's had in life.
I feel sorry for anybody who's in the royal family, because I feel they haven't the choices I've had. Their lives are planned.
In a moment, a look at then and now as we compare coronations, country and Commonwealth.
Elizabeth, unimpeachable, beautiful, innocent, young female, was this extraordinarily fresh package in an ancient institution and shielded from the cameras.
Dr. Tessa Dunlop is a historian. She's also written the book Elizabeth and Philip about the late Queen and her husband.
That idea of her having this relationship, this anointing with God, I think resonated for what was really still a pretty deferential Britain. A still large number of people were churchgoers, very, very different from today. Things have changed unrecognisably. In the last census, under half of Britons ticked the Protestant box, let alone the Anglican box. So this idea of the defender of the faith and that relationship has changed hugely. And I think we have to recognise, therefore, this has a less emotional impact, partly because of the person herself being so young and innocent and seemingly vulnerable, and partly because of that relationship we now have with the established church, or rather don't have.
Socially and politically, the backdrop is so different now from in 1953. Remind us, paint the picture of the last coronation and just what was going on in post-war Britain.
And this brings us on to the second issue, or arguably the biggest issue, which was Britain's position on the global stage in 1953, on something of a crossroads, but still, although of course there were the two twin pillars, meat and housing, Churchill, back in power, ever worried that we didn't have enough of either, which was true. We didn't. We had a dire balance of payments deficit. We also had issues with rationing. But actually, a lot of Britain's problems stemmed directly from World War II, which in terms of our soft power had seen us, yes, financially crippled, but actually in some ways temporarily politically emboldened. So there were issues, but there was also exciting transitions. Empire to Commonwealth, deference to democracy, and somehow casting some of these ideas through this young prism of a feminine queen really added to the magic of the event. Churchill was adamant this was going to be a big deal. Yes, wait 18 months after her accession, get the bailiffs out of the house, but we need to go blockbuster on this. And of course, television added that extra exciting post-war tech pizzazz. It brought the event not just to the people of Britain, but further afield to parts of the Commonwealth. A lot, of course, didn't have telly, across vitally to America. Now, if you flip that and look where we are today, things are very, very different. Arguably, our cost of living crisis, very low productivity in relation to other G7 countries, our loss of soft power, not just post-war, but more acutely in the wake of Brexit, etc., cannot be temporarily pinned on a wall. So Britain, in other words, has slipped on the international stage. Vitally, it's important to understand that very shortly after the coronation, she went on this thumping, record-breaking Commonwealth tour that went on for 6 months. She stowed her coronation gown into the bows of the ship and off she went with her dashing war hero husband. 1/3 of Australia turned out to roar at their queen. Can you imagine that today, Sally?
Things have changed. And just what impact did the Queen's ascension have? You know, her marriage to Prince Philip, this young, glamorous couple. What impact did that have on the country and internationally?
Elizabeth and Philip embodied two ideas that their generation believed in. We talk nowadays about identity politics, and it's all over the shop. What is your identity? You know, there's so many different versions of identity in Britain today. But back then, they spoke for their generation and for the masses who were returning from war, eager to shed their uniform and crack on with an optimistic peace. And they weren't alone. Elizabeth and Philip led an unprecedented crash down the aisle. So 1947, more couples got married at a younger age than ever seen before in peacetime Britain, nearly 500,000 couples, over 400,000. So they were bang on trend and they spoke for the young, for the future, through no fault of his own in many respects. The same cannot be said for Charles. And the other thing is, the marriage of Elizabeth and Philip was seen to be critical to their role as members of the royal family. This was branded, really, the House of Windsor as the country's first family. That was 1950s Britain. There was a royal commission into marriage and divorce in 1954. Such was the clamour for some couples to want to get divorced, but they couldn't afford to. And actually, they came down heavily, the commission, on the side of marriage. The divorce laws would not be reformed until late 1960s. So it was very important that Elizabeth and Philip was seen to be this successful marriage, this unit, functioning, idealised marital unit.
How much tougher do you think it's going to be for Charles and Camilla?
It's almost not comparable. Obviously, parts of the service will be the same, the venue's the same, the ideas, the traditions will be slightly adapted, but the idea of anointing and a head down homage, etc. But actually, the times we live in and the way in which we now choose to or choose not to identify our monarch has been irrevocably altered. By the 1980s, half the population are getting divorced. But yet when Diana and Charles trundle down the aisle in St. Paul's, there's this kind of idea, oh, look, we're having another fairy tale wedding. You know, it's just going to go on as before, the royal family. How could it possibly, with the pressures of the modern era? In many respects, they were being set up to fail. And I don't think that we can remove ourselves from that narrative. And certainly in Commonwealth countries where they haven't been fed a rebranded Camilla in the way that we have, because our tabloid press have got on side with Camilla over the last couple of decades. They've very much still hold on to the Diana narrative. And I think that makes Camilla a harder sell in many of their foreign realms. And certainly it makes her a more challenging sell in parts of Britain who want that idea of an unimpeachable monarch. Instead, we have an everyman monarch, which arguably much more reflects our times. But do we want the monarch to reflect our times? Isn't why we loved perfect little Elizabeth precisely because she was so idealized and untainted? It's interesting, that moment where the decision was taken that the coronation had to be televised. For some reason, and I don't know why, it became sort of like a myth that Philip was behind that idea. He was the one that pushed it on the Coronation Commission. That's bunkum. Philip wasn't the modernizer in this instance. It was actually the press who thought, God damn it, if we're going to be spending all this money on a coronation, we want to see it. This is the people's coronation. It was a winsome idea because it combined ancient tradition with cutting edge technology. There was a kind of magical alchemy. I don't know, Sally, but you must have relations in your family who remember running to their 9-inch television screen, sharing that moment with their nearest and dearest and their neighbours, and therefore sharing that moment with their queen. So there was this kind of literal bonding idea of togetherness that can never be replicated today because we're all seeing everything on television today. That's gone, that magic. That was, in that moment, unique for its time. In contrast, today, we have goddamn social media. And the difference is it can't be curated. It's outside of their control. The Queen, to an extent, because of her great age, because she became this national treasure. I think we forgot how unpopular the royal family was in the 90s with all the Diana tragedy and the divorces, etc. If you think about the reverence we saw, the unconditional outpouring of love we saw at the time of her funeral for this exceptional woman, most mainly exceptional because, of course, the position she'd occupied. So to an extent, she was allowed to dabble rather wonderfully with Zooms and tech, and occasionally popped up on our screens. But actually, the vitriol that other members of the royal family have faced, she was protected from.
King Charles is having a very pared down coronation this time, trying to obviously reflect the cost of living crisis.
There is a conundrum about how much you spend because you want it to have the wow factor, because otherwise, what's the point? The last coronation on the continent, and remember all the other great royal houses came from Europe, the last one was in 1922. It was Queen Marie and Ferdinand of Romania. And this was because Romania had doubled in size during World War I and wanted to let everybody know that. And so they had this thumping great coronation in 1920. That's the last one. And so why does Britain keep doing this? And if you are going to do it, and it is going to cost X million, we're not going to know the full cost until after the event, by the way, it's got to be impressive. But if you don't spend money, it can't be impressive. So it's like a sort of catch-22, the ultimate conundrum. And I think that's a very difficult circle to square. There's going to be far fewer people in the Abbey. They packed in over 8,000 people. It's lucky it wasn't COVID times in the Abbey in 1953. There's going to be 2,000. Little more than 2,000 in Westminster this time. So that's very different.
2,000 people rattling around Westminster Abbey this time.
Yeah. Certainly, we've also had quite a lot of sort of jubilees and celebrations and funerals. There is, I think, a bit of royal fatigue almost. How many times can we wave a Union Jack? Don't forget, we've had a glut. You have golden, then you had diamond, then you had platinum jubilees, then you had the funeral to end all funerals. After Charles's coronation, say he lives, very unlikely given the average lifespan of a male today in Britain, but say he lived another 25 years, it would be that long before we have a silver jubilee. I do wonder, once things die down, how Camilla and Charles broaden the appeal of monarchy, because it's gone from polling at about 86% in the 1980s, dropping to 69% in the 1990s, and then hovering at around 55% just before the Queen died. That's 55% of people who are pro or a bit pro the monarchy. That leaves a large number of people who are either anti or ambivalent. What I hope for the coronation is that it catches and encourages people out of that ambivalence. But I'm not sure I've seen any signs it's going to yet.
We've already seen Charles make moves to try and modernise the monarchy. How do you think he's going to try to adapt things for modern times?
That's $1 million question. I'm alone in this, by the way, but I was, for example, a little bit disappointed with their selection of honorary page boys for the coronation. They're pretty much all relatives or friends of the family and recruited out of white upper class England, not even Scotland or Wales. People see through tokenism, but Charles has been waiting a long time to assume the mantle of monarchy, and I would like to see something broader, more diverse, more inclusive. He has the prince's trust. He is, in so much of what he does, quite an inclusive man. But we need to see that represented in the households. Still Buckingham Palace, under 10% of their employees recruited from ethnic minorities, when London is over 40% ethnic minority. So there are things that for me don't quite stack up. It can't be that difficult. And I think obviously the Meghan and Harry issue, that's a big deal. We need our monarchy to work for us overseas. That's one of the reasons why we fund it, is because it's this incredible emblem of soft power. Beyond the coronation, it's a real chance to extend ideas of Britishness and British goodwill. And I think the royal family need to, in some way, better represent the country that they come from, because we're not this crusty old former empire. It's a cool place to be, Britain.
Do you think we'll ever see another coronation like this again?
The royal family, as we have known it, as this popular brand running right through the spine, if you like, of 20th century, early 21st century Britain, I'm not sure it's set to continue. It's skating on much thinner ice than it was. I think when an institution doesn't speak for the majority in the same way, then it makes ideas of wrapping nationhood around that institution harder to justify. So will William and Kate be coronated? I'm 50-50 on that. He might just get a hand on the head, as I think it's his Norwegian counterpart gets.
While there's no front row seat for Brian or Julie this time round, they, along with thousands of others around the country, have some plans closer to home.
Where I live, we've got 2 parties that weekend. I've got my crowns already.
And what does Brian think about the King's future?
And for Charles, optimistic, yes. I don't know what will happen.
My thanks to Tessa Dunlop, Brian Kesteven and Julie Windsor, and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Sally Lockwood. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce with Alex Eden. Our editor is Philly Beaumont. And if you can hang on for a brief moment, we want to tell you about a new Sky News podcast about Queen Camilla.
From the moment Camilla Parker Bowles became front page news.
I need you all the week, all the time.
Oh, God. I'll just live inside your trousers or something. It'll be much easier.
What are you, going to turn into a pair of knickers?
In a scandal that rocked the world.
You've got Prince Charles saying he wants to be a tampon inside Camilla.
Humiliating proof of her affair with Prince Charles.
I have no idea how Camilla coped with the nastiness and the relentless abuse.
But together, Camilla and Charles's love survived.
They've surmounted all of that and they have a true love.
Her reputation repaired.
That turnaround in perceptions of her is remarkable, given just what a low base Charles and Camilla were on. Diana was calling Camilla a Rottweiler.
And now to a new role beside the new king.
This reign will depend, for its success, in no small part, on Camilla.
I'm Kay Burley, and from Sky News, this is Queen Camilla, for the Love of Charles, a new podcast charting her rollercoaster ride to becoming Queen of the Commonwealth.